Hello and welcome to our program. In this episode of Addis Dialogue, I'll be spending some time with Joe Miklosi, whose government background includes serving as a Colorado representative, a congressional candidate in 2012, working for President Bill Clinton in 1992, and serving on Hillary Clinton's National Finance Committee in 2016, and currently he is working as the founder and CEO of Bridge Consulting Corporation. And to stay with us, Mr. McCloskey, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Shakur, it's a pleasure to be here all the way from beautiful Denver, Colorado in the States, but I've been to Ethiopia many times, and it's always a pleasure to be with you, sir.
All right. Now, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia has declared persona non grata for 7 individuals to leave the country within 74 hours who are working for various international NGOs in Ethiopia for meddling in the internal affairs of the East African nation. What are some of your observations and reflections in this regard?
Well, I think every country, including our own, the United States, goes through its initial stages of growth to move up the economic and political ladder of power. We obviously did that in the early 1800s here in the United States. And I think Ethiopia is unique because, as you know far better than I, it is a rich, diverse, pluralistic country that goes back millennia, thousands of years. Now, in its current iteration of power, this is a fascinating young Republican democracy that I think is trying to show the world that not only are they the second most populous country on the continent of Africa, one of the largest militaries on the continent, but economically, one of the largest in the region as well. And this is all part of the natural growth of a country. Now, what I think is interesting is I know there's a healthy skepticism by some for the international development community to come in and work on, healthcare system strengthening projects, food security projects, and other things to eradicate poverty. I've devoted a third of my career to working in that sector. On a side note, I used to work for 8 years for an amazing NGO or nonprofit organization called Project Cure that actually helped equip over 100 hospitals with life-saving medical supplies and medical equipment in hospitals throughout the country of Ethiopia, from Gondor to Addis to all over. And again, that was just Americans dealing with Ethiopians to provide hospital beds and other necessary items. So I know firsthand there's a lot of good work that gets done within the Ethiopian community by the NGO community. Having said all that, I know there's a healthy skepticism that there are some dark actors that might be using NGOs to try to infiltrate Ethiopia. I've not seen evidence of that. I've worked with the good stakeholders.
Let's also talk about the Ethiopian government. As you know, Ethiopia is forming new government based on the elections it held. What's your expected of the diaspora communities and also friends of Ethiopia for the success of the new government?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say that any diaspora community, but especially the Ethiopian American diaspora community, has power. As a former elected official, I'm a former state congressman from the state of Colorado. And I'm telling you, when you represent hundreds of thousands of people, when you go to town hall meetings and talk to individuals, they have power, especially when they're coalescing and grouping together. As the old adage states, there's strength in numbers. I've been so impressed working with many of the 750,000 Ethiopian Americans in all 50 states in the United States of America that make up the Ethiopian American Civic Council that the great Deacon Yosef Tafari co-founded and is the current president of. And I've seen as they work in all the congressional districts, in all the states to influence United States senators, there's incredible power that this diaspora community has here in the United States to influence the Biden administration on things like AGOA, the African Growth Opportunity Act, and how Ethiopia should remain in it, as well as influence members of Congress, even those that don't serve on a foreign relations committee, because these members of Congress and the Biden administration do pay attention. They may not always agree, but it does influence their way of thinking. And that's something that my colleagues, Roger Irvin and Monica McCafferty and I are working with the Ethiopian diaspora on to increase their power.
Hmm. So, as far as the diaspora is concerned, diaspora policy is concerned, what should the new government do from now on?
Sure. I think, like any new government, you have to focus on some fundamentals. What do the people want? What did they elect you for? And what's your vision? As the old proverb once says, where there is no vision, the people shall perish. And
Hmm.
I truly believe Dr. Abiy's vision is to try to create a more inclusive economy. As we all know, during the 27-year autocratic reign of the TPLF from 1991 to 2018, they were about dividing. It's a classic colonistic um, tactic, divide and conquer. Well, as you know better than I, there's well over 90 strong, proud ethnic groups within the country of Ethiopia. A lot of pluralism. The three Abrahamic faith traditions all reside and coexist and intermarry and have for over a millennia. There's a lot of pride about Ethiopia. And I respect that more than you know. And I think Dr. Abiy needs to tap into that. All of the leaders in the government of Ethiopia need to tap into that and try to create an inclusive economy where everyone's gifts and talents are utilized to help this economy grow. And then finally, we have to make sure that the continuation of the filling of the GERD, the Grand Renaissance Ethiopian Dam, occurs, that sustainable power is provided not to just the Ethiopian people, but all of its riparian neighbors.
What about foreign policy change? There is the talk of cutting 30 or so embassies abroad and beefing up digital diplomacy. And we've got this issue with Egypt and Sudan, in addition to the issues within the country. What should Ethiopia do to triumph in the diplomatic arena?
Pulling back is never the answer. I'm a
Mm,
firm believer in what I call the three Ds. You talk about defense, development, and diplomacy. Sometimes the defense budget gets most of the focus for any country, including here in the United States of America. But diplomacy and development, those two other Ds, are really critical aspects of any foreign policy. We call them soft power. And whenever you take away one of your cards, one of your abilities to communicate, it causes both your friends and allies, as well as your enemies around the world or the region, to question um, your motives, increase negative stereotypes, because there's a gap, a vacuum in leadership. So pulling away is never the answer. Having communication, even when people vigorously disagree, is always the answer, because you have to keep communication open before um, other more negative things occur, like warfare. So
mm,
that's the first fundamental. Secondly, you have to build in an inclusive economy, diplomatic relationships, and military partnerships. Something that we emphasize a lot to the Ethiopian American diaspora community, to members of Congress and the Biden administration, is that the United States Department of Defense, its military, and the Ethiopian military have shared a multi-decade relationship to seek out and destroy terrorist cells like Al Shabaab, whether it's in Somalia or other places within the Horn of Africa. That's a critical relationship. To use a bipartisan example, both the Trump administration and the Obama administration all went on record to talk about how important that vital relationship is between those two militaries to seek out and destroy terrorist cells. That makes the Horn of Africa a safer place. And again, diplomacy and embassies and communication are critical aspects of that broader topic and conversation.
mm. So, talking about the United States of America, Mr. Miklosi, can the U.S. afford to lose Ethiopia as a vital partner, if you will, in East African nation? You know, especially when it comes to the fight against terrorism and the likes.
No, it cannot, sir. The United States of America, the United States people, and especially the Ethiopian American diaspora community in the United States of America, needs a strong, vital partnership with Ethiopia. We've seen what happens when we sometimes play too hard or try to marginalize the Ethiopian government and Dr. Abiy. The Ethiopian government will then begin to have more close relationships with some of our enemies, China, Russia, and other stakeholders that sometimes we call them frenemies, whether it's actors in the Middle East, Turkey. We have to make sure that we have a close relationship, despite disagreements, between the United States government and Ethiopia, because as we know, China is competing geopolitically throughout the entire continent of Africa. I do a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa on agricultural issues, helping smallholder farmers grow crops in a more sustainable and profitable way with one of my clients called Plant Catalyst. And what's interesting is you see the footprint of China everywhere, not just building seaports and airports and roads through the spines of countries with 50% interest rates over 99-year leases. Many of these nation states in the country or in the continent of Africa are starting to second guess those relationships. That's what happens when the United States moves out its influence of power. China and Russia fill it. And it's one of many examples why we need to have a strong and robust relationship, even when we have honest disagreements between the Ethiopia and the United States government.
I think also this issue applies to the whole continent of Africa. Many say that the United States of America would be better off or would benefit much more if it's invested in Africa. What do you think?
Well, I absolutely do. And this is a topic I've worked a great deal of my career on. If you add up all the annual investments from the European Union countries, as well as Australia and the United States government through USAID, we're obviously focusing on about 25 of the 55 countries on the continent of Africa, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, on what I call eradicating the pillars of poverty. So investing in things like clean and sustainable drinking water, making sure we reduce trafficking, sex trafficking for young girls so they can stay in school through the age of 18 like the boys can, so that they don't get involved in sex trafficking activities by some very nefarious actors. Working on an economy that is almost more unionized and more collective, for that not only the agriculture industry, but all workers have a better say-so in the economy and can transition from an agrarian economy someday to an industrialized one. These and other issues are critical for eradicating poverty. And if you look at all the statistics, and we haven't even talked about healthcare, but if you look at all the statistics, many of these countries are starting to rise up the economic and healthcare ladder and have more sustainability, have better statistical results on, for example, the reduction of HIV/AIDS, better prevention, treatment of care for HIV/AIDS patients, reduction of maternal mortality rates, more girls staying in school, but we still have a long work to do. That's because of a lot of the work that we've all done. And we haven't even talked about PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for HIV/AIDS relief. To me, that's one of the greatest foreign policy achievements in the history of the United States government. And there's well over 20 million Africans alive today because of the American taxpayer. And I'm proud of that. But again, it's a partnership. Now, when you add all of the work that China's doing, mainly on the industrial side, it paints a more holistic picture. But we cannot give up our ability to have that influence. And the European Union is just as much involved as we are.
Okay. Sir, I've been approaching various Ethio-Americans over these issues that Ethiopia is grappling with. But see that despite the strong will, the Ethiopian diaspora communities are acting in a haphazard, if you will, or disjointed manner. Also, the government, many say, has not rendered the assistance that it deserves. What do you think? What is your take on that?
Yeah, this is an interesting issue because I've been closely aligned with the Ethiopian American diaspora community here in the United States for well over a decade. But right now, I'm obviously working closely with the Ethiopian American Civic Council, which is, by the way, is the largest and most diverse Ethiopian American USA-based nonprofit organization that truly tries to represent the viewpoints of the Ethiopian American diaspora. When I look at all of the 90 plus major Ethiopian ethnic groups represented in the United States, I would say 90% of those have a strong support of Dr. Abiy and the vision where he's trying to take this country, especially after a 27-year autocratic reign by the TPLF from 1991 to 2018, which we all know how they stole $30 billion, suppressed civil liberties, jailed over 250 journalists, suppressed religious liberties, a whole list of autocratic activities. Even my friends who support TPLF will admit those activities. So I think in the United States, you see 90% with general agreement, but you know how it is, it's human nature. Sometimes we look for the differences between us versus the things that unify us. So one of the jobs that my colleagues and I have been trying to find some very basic values that can unite us all. And number one, we need to make sure the United States of America has a balanced approach to the Ethiopian government. We have to make sure that we engage in close partnership with the Ethiopian government, especially with military partnership and the Ethiopian government to destroy terror cells, or China and Russia will fill that vacuum. We want to make sure humanitarian assistance is getting to the people in need, regardless of their creed, because it's about human life. And I think all the different faith traditions and political doctrines can agree upon that. And then we want to make sure that the Ethiopians have their own destiny to fill the GERD. They deserve sustainable power, as well as assisting their neighbors, including Egypt and Sudan, with sustainable power as well. And on an interesting note on that, I was doing some research with a colleague and found out on the Nile River, there's at least 29 other dams. For some reason, the Ethiopian GERD dam creates controversy. What happened during the construction and filling of the 29 other dams on the Nile River? There wasn't controversy. So it's just an example of sometimes where Hellenistic politics from Egypt tries to suppress the self-destiny and determination of the Ethiopian people.
Now, talking about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, what should the diaspora communities do so that Ethiopia's stance, the country's fair stance, may be better known among the diaspora communities in the world? Yeah.
Sure. I think the first thing is we have to know the history before we know the future. When you look at the two colonistic treaties from 1929 and 1959, that basically Great Britain and Egypt negotiated with Ethiopia. At the time, Ethiopia wasn't as powerful as they are today. As we know today, Ethiopia is strong, both in terms of population, economic might, and a strong military. But back in 1929 and 1959, they didn't have the power. And those two colonistic treaties should not be the determining documents for moving forward. The second value is that there is a responsibility Ethiopia has to provide water to its riparian neighbors. It's why almost 10 of Ethiopia's riparian neighbors have said we support Ethiopia's right to build and have a second and future filling of the GERD. Ethiopia is going to continue to provide water down the Nile River to Sudan, Egypt, and its neighbors.
Let's go back to the Ethiopia's diplomacy, and some are expressing frustration, if you will, about the deafening, so to speak, silence of Ethiopian officials, blaming them for Ethiopia's diplomatic failure and condemning some international media and aid agencies' unfair characterization of events in Ethiopia. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I've been puzzled by that too, Shakra. I don't understand why there hasn't been more robust communication from the Ethiopian government towards Washington, D.C., international community, and other stakeholders. Again, I go back to my earlier comments. You have to have conversations, even when you vigorously disagree. But when you take away your one power, your voice, the voice of the people, whether it's the diaspora community that I represent here in the United States, or in this case, to your example, the Ethiopian government, it puzzles me. And if there's one word of advice I would give them is they need to get back to that negotiating table and really have a robust vision of where they think they want their partnerships with the region, the United States government, and the broader community to go. Because whenever you're quiet, your enemies are going to speak and they're not going to say good things about you.
Finally, let me ask you this question. What is your message to Ethiopians who are in the midst of challenges from different angles, from within and from without?
We're with you. We support you. We're praying for you. And we are mobilizing 750,000 Ethiopian Americans to stand with you shoulder to shoulder as brothers and sisters. We love you, and we will get through this and have better days in Ethiopia.
All right. This Miklosi, thank you so much for your wonderful perspectives.
So, Carl, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. I hope we can do it again soon in the future, my friend.
Well, dear viewers, with that, we come to the end of today's program. Many thanks for your company so far. Until I see you next time with yet another program, it's goodbye for me, Shifaralaka. Stay safe and take care.